It is my great pleasure to rise today to speak on the pill testing bill that the Greens will be most enthusiastically supporting. I am glad that Labor has finally come to their senses and has brought forward this bill that treats drug use as a health issue, not a criminal one. For over a decade, the Greens have consistently advocated for drug checking as a vital harm reduction tool. We've held events at Revs. I visited Groove in the Moo to talk to punters directly about this issue, and I've seen this sort of setup firsthand in visiting the CanTest pill testing service in Canberra. We have introduced multiple bills in this place over the years, some quite similar to this bill. We worked with the Reason Party to bring the first ever co-sponsored bill in 2019 and then made history again by introducing a three-party co-sponsored bill with the Greens, Animal Justice Party and Legalise Cannabis Victoria. We've worked with the community and advocated because we know that pill testing saves lives. So many organisations in Victoria have been working so hard to make this bill and drug checking in our state a reality, and I thank them all so much for their work, and I'm genuinely so pleased that this will now become a reality in Victoria. In fact, I checked, and it was the very first question without notice that I asked after being elected to this place on this very issue. This bill accepts the reality that people use drugs and that young people will experiment with them. Our job in this place is to make sure that that doesn't end in tragedy. This bill will create an 18-month drug checking trial in Victoria. Through passing this bill, there'll be a fixed site drug checking location in Melbourne from mid-next year and mobile pill testing at 10 festivals from this summer. People who use these services will have their samples tested and the chance to speak to a harm reduction expert about the contents of their drugs and the likely risks and effects. For many people, this will probably be the first time that they've ever spoken to an expert about their drug use and received advice to help keep them safe. People will have the chance to discard their drugs, should they choose. And in fact, we've seen in other pill testing locations that often people will make this choice if it turns out that there is something unknown or potentially lethal in their substance. Testing these drugs will also provide important surveillance information to inform public health alerts that the threat of dangerous synthetic opioids continues to loom over our state. We need this data. We've already had tragic deaths from nitazenes here in Melbourne. Nitazenes are incredibly strong and regularly lethal. Drug checking is another tool to assist public health teams to keep an eye out for the presence of these substances. There is much more to be done to prepare for the influx of nitazenes, but this is an important tool. The addition of naloxone vending machines is another welcome life-saving tool with this bill. This easy-to-use rapid overdose reversal drug will now be available to people from vending machines in Victoria. Naloxone is safe to use, it's easy to administer and can prevent opioid overdose deaths from drugs such as heroin. It is, however, incredibly disappointing that the state Labor government continues to ignore the data and the expert recommendations that Melbourne CBD, among other places, needs a supervised injecting facility. It's wonderful that pill testing will now be available, but it should not be at the expense of another vital life-saving tool. It was the primary recommendation from the much-anticipated Ken Lay report that a medically supervised injecting room be opened in our city. It is hypocritical to proclaim the life-saving benefits of the North Richmond room and then refuse to open more of these overdose prevention centres so that more people can access these services. But it is not too late to change your mind on supervised injecting rooms. When we introduced our pill testing bill in 2019, the then Premier did not support this. More recently, our current Premier had said something similar, that she didn't support drug checking, but then she changed her mind and changed the government's policy. Drug checking will save lives in Victoria, and I urge the Labor government to change their minds on supervised injecting centres too. Open one in Melbourne, open one in Geelong, anywhere, everywhere that the data tells us to open them, because we need these services to keep people safe. But on this bill and on pill testing, it's common sense, it's overdue, but it's greatly welcome and I commend it to the House.
This is not the first time we have stood in this place and debated drug checking. It isn't even the first time we've stood in this place and debated a pill testing bill. With that in mind, I would like to start by acknowledging the work of Fiona Patten and the Greens, who in 2019 introduced the first ever co-sponsored pill testing bill into the Victorian Parliament. It may have taken 5 more long years for this government to act, but it would not have been possible without your advocacy, so I say thanks. When we at Legalise Cannabis Victoria were elected, As a party built on the idea of harm reduction, it was clear to us that drug checking must be a priority for this government. We spent time meeting with harm reduction groups who do incredible work that, without a doubt, got us to where we are today. This included meetings with groups like Victorian Alcohol and Drug Association. Their statements, supported by 77 health and community agencies, called on the Victorian government to legislate a drug checking system. Earlier this year, they also helped to develop a drug checking model in Victoria, in collaboration with Harm Reduction Victoria and other stakeholders. We also met with CanTest, who in 2022 set up Australia's first ever fixed pill testing service in Canberra. We heard how in the first 6 months they offered 675 discussions, 85 health interventions, 614 substance tests, proving vital services to their clients. Clients were able to know what they were taking and make an informed decision, knowing what to do if the worst happened. They don't tell people it's safe or encourage them to take drugs. That is simply not what these services do. The evidence shows us that those who access drug checking services change their behaviour to reduce their risks. It is evident that these services save lives. I would like to acknowledge all of the individuals and stakeholders who work or volunteer their time in the harm reduction space, including Pill Testing Australia, Harm Reduction Victoria, Students for Sensible Drug Law Reform, YSAS and DanceWise, to name a few, whose tireless work has seen this positive outcome, and today is your win. Earlier this year, I was extremely proud that Legalise Cannabis Victoria collaborated with the Greens and the Animal Justice Party to again introduce a bill to establish pill testing in Victoria. I would like to give a special shout out to Georgie and Ave, or as we affectionately call ourselves, the Pingers crew, my good friends who worked tirelessly with sick sunglasses and a sick determination to get pill testing off the ground in Victoria. While we waited for the government to act, we continued to raise the urgency of drug checking services in Parliament, acknowledging that while the government dragged their feet, young Victorians continued to lose their lives. There is decades of research and lived examples from over 20 countries and domestically showing that drug checking services save lives by preventing clients from using strong or contaminated drugs. Drug checking services allow for communication with people, often for the first time, about safer drug use, support services and harm reduction. It also helps to detect new and dangerous substances before we see a mass overdose event. There has been a lot of work to get us to where we are today. It is unfortunate that it has taken this long to get here and so many lives have been lost. It should not have needed to take this much advocacy from stakeholders, multiple bills in Parliament and 4 coroners in 6 years recommending access to drug checking services. Turning now to the details of the bill, we are pleased to see that it will enable a drug checking trial at fixed and mobile sites. These sites will be authorised to analyse samples, inform the client of potential risks and other factors which can contribute to harm. The presence of trained harm reduction peer workers and technical experts will further strengthen the efficacy of these services. We are also extremely pleased to see that this bill will allow for the automatic dispensation of naloxone, something us and many of our colleagues have been calling for some time now. I raised this issue in Parliament last month and the case of a THC vape that contained protonidazine, a synthetic opioid which is 100 times more potent than heroin. With the rise in substances like nidazine circulating in the community, now more than ever we need access to medications to address opioid overdose. We are concerned about whether these testing facilities will be equipped to test plant material. We know that cannabis can be contaminated with other dangerous substances, and we believe that those who use cannabis should be entitled to access these services. In the ACT, the CAN Act study, funded by the Lambert Initiative, allows residents to anonymously submit their cannabis for testing, free of charge, to not only analyse cannabis content, but also test for harmful contaminants like toxins, heavy metals and pesticides. Users of the service have said that it has been helpful in giving them peace of mind and helping them to better understand their own health. If these services cannot test plant material, we hope that in time, once these services become established, there will be a greater investment so they can expand their testing services. We do also have concerns about the level of detail this bill provides when it comes to police discretion not to charge clients of drug checking services. While this bill clarifies that police have this discretion, it does nothing further to ensure that they do not target clients of drug checking services. We have heard anecdotes from similar services overseas and from medically supervised injecting rooms that while most police officers do the right thing, there are instances where police do target clients of these services. It is our hope that alongside this legislation in Victoria, there will be a change to police training that will provide direction on how to treat clients accessing these services. We would be putting forward some questions in the Committee of the Whole stage to further clarify how this is intended to roll out and to raise other queries we have in relation to the bill. All it takes is one story of a friend who was singled out by the police to scare off many more who would have benefited from accessing drug checking services. I'd like to thank Minister Stitt and her team for the ongoing engagement on this bill and drug harm reduction more broadly. A special mention must also be afforded to the Premier, who I feel has been courageous in talking openly about her concerns as a parent and how her position on drug checking services changed. We congratulate this government on bringing forward this legislation and for doing so in a way that will ensure pill testing can be rolled out in time for the December festival season.
I'm really pleased to speak in support of this bill today because drug testing and pill testing saves lives. It is as simple as that. This bill does exactly what myself and many other members of the crossbench have been calling for some time, and we're really pleased to see the government finally listen to those calls. If we have the ability to respond to and reduce drug harm, we as politicians have an obligation to ensure that that happens, regardless of how we feel about drug use itself. This bill offers a pill testing pilot and licensing of one fixed location drug checking service, both offering open conversations detailing the substances provided, the associated harms and risks, and issuing referrals to health or social services. The mobile service will attend music festivals and hotspots where we know drug use is already rampant. Our nation's capital and Queensland are already offering pill testing with resounding success, alongside 28 other countries. The evidence is there to show that this works. But let me be clear, despite what other members of Parliament have said in here today, this bill is not about enhancing access to drugs, nor is it normalising drug use. What it will do is address the failures of this state to protect its citizens from ingesting fatal substances. It will fill in the gaps where our criminal laws have fallen short in addressing the root cause of drug-induced harm and deaths. It is a simplistic reduction and, frankly, a very uneducated view to say that pill testing increases drug use. The real contributor to overdoses and unintentional drug harm is the lack of informed decision-making and the absence of support. Today, we have the opportunity to remedy just that. We know our youth are dying or becoming seriously ill from taking drugs. Our recent summer festival season has shown us just that. These people are dying in the shadows of our sphere of care and until now in the purview of this government. This bill seeks to bring the behaviour that already occurs in secrecy and unchecked into the light and into the hands of the professionals who know it best. Prospective drug users will be able to have their limited quantities tested for any unknown or fatal substances. In doing so, a health worker is able to discuss their drug use with them so that they can make informed and therefore safer decisions. It is as simple as that. For many, these very discussions will likely be the first of their kind for many individuals who have previously felt uncomfortable discussing it with a parent, adult or doctor due to the fear of judgment or, at worst, prosecution. Further, amnesty bins will be provided so that people can dispose of their tested drugs without consequence. This also enables the health authorities to understand what variation of drugs are being used, trends in the market, what unexpected chemicals may be found in patients, and empower the issuing of real-time public alerts about new or dangerous drug compositions. By just one person testing a substance and triggering an alert, we will have the ability to save not just one life, but multiple others who have purchased the same batch. Acting President, drugs are a reality within this state, and we can no longer pretend that it is not our responsibility to minimise the associated risks. If we are to expect that young people do not engage in drug use once out of the schooling system, we must continue the education when they are confronted with these very opportunities. The answer to minimising drug use harm is not further punishment, for everyone knows already that the conduct is illegal. Yet what they do not know is the composition and the potency of what they are ingesting. In Canberra, the pill testing scheme has already shown that people were 4 times more likely to say that they would not take their tested drugs when it was found that the substance showed unexpected ingredients, additional drugs, or inconclusive results. The 2018 inquiry into drug law reform recommended, and I quote, "The Victorian Government establish an early warning system to enable analysis, monitoring and public communications about new psychoactive substances and other illicit substances of concern." In 2018, novel psychoactive substances contributed to 3 deaths. Yet without implementation of this recommendation, this figure has rapidly increased, accounting for 47 potentially avoidable deaths in 2021 to 2022 caused by new psychoactive substances. Further to this, State Coroner Judge John Cain on the 6th of September 2023 recommended that the Victorian Government implement a drug checking service following the death of a 26-year-old man in 2022 from a highly potent type of MDMA pill called the Blue Punisher that induces seizures, multi-organ failure and brain swelling. His Honour noted that in this unregulated drug market, there is a heightened overdose risk because consumers cannot be certain of their composition or strength. This is not a standalone case, but rather represents the upward trajectory of deaths in Victoria from a lack of pill testing. I think one of the worst traits for many of us as politicians is thinking that we know best and we know everything about every topic. But I actually think one of the best traits of a politician is to listen to the experts who know the subject matter best. And experts have been pleading with us for years now to implement this service. We've been presented with an opportunity to do better and to simply listen to them about the reality we are already living in and what we can do to reduce that harm. So, Acting President, this bill is for the young person who feels pressured into taking drugs by their friends. This bill is for the person willingly experimenting for the very first time and those that have made the decision to continue recreationally using. This bill is for the concerned parent who has found illicit substances in their family home. This bill is for those who are drug dependent and trying not to overdose. This bill is for some of my own friends, and I'm sure this will shock precisely nobody. This bill is also for my younger self. It is for the safety of all Victorians. Today is a choice. It is a choice between a young person never returning home to their family, or instead a young person having a brat summer with informed and safe choices, and I commend it to the House.
Can I invite members who are voting for the second reading to now stand in their place? And can I indicate I'm voting for the second reading? Thank you, members. You can return to your seats. Can I invite members of voting against the second reading to now stand in their place? Thank you, members. You can return to your seats. The result is the division is ayes 23, no 16. Therefore, the second reading has passed and the bill will now be considered in the Committee of the Whole.